The only way to continue to develop yourself as a leader is to expand the size of your mental model circle, expand the size of your skill circle, expand the size of your style circle, and their intersection, which by definition makes a much larger choice set. One of the great gifts of Leaders in Tech and Touchy Feely is that you have an immersive experience where you are spending a lot of time unpacking for yourself what your mental models are. And now that you become aware of your mental models, you've got a new set of choices.
Welcome to the Perpetual Growth Podcast with Zach Palmer, the show where we explore the strategies, insights, and stories that empower you to grow your business, strengthen your relationships, and elevate your health. Because growth isn't just about what you achieve, it's about who you become along the way. Today's guest has spent the last 4 decades helping leaders stop performing and start connecting, transforming how they show up in their companies, their relationships, and their lives. Dr. Carole Robin is the co-founder of Leaders in Tech, a pioneering nonprofit that helps senior executives grow through the power of emotional intelligence, feedback, and radical human connection. She's also the co-author of the award-winning book Connect, which translates the legendary Stanford Business School course Interpersonal Dynamics, affectionately known as Touchy Feely, into a roadmap for personal and professional transformation. Carole has been named one of Forbes 50 Future of Work thought leaders, and her teaching, writing, and coaching have impacted thousands of leaders from Silicon Valley to across the globe. This episode is about what it means to lead with humanity and how our growth isn't measured by what we achieve, but how deeply we connect along the way. Carole, welcome to the Perpetual Growth Podcast. I'm super excited to have you here today.
Thank you so much. It's an honor and a pleasure to be here.
Fantastic. Well, Carole, I always like to start with this question because I think it reveals a lot about who someone really is. What does growth mean to you right now in this season of your life?
Lovely question. So for me at this point of my life, growth continues to mean uh, curiosity, never thinking that I've got the answers, but always discovering new questions or new nuances to questions. I find human beings just endlessly fascinating.
Yeah.
And anybody who's a growth junkie, as I am, is it can't help but be fascinated by how much there is to learn because human beings are anything but one size fits all. So they so if every one of the things I always say is every interaction with another human being is an opportunity to learn. It's an
Mhm.
opportunity to learn about yourself, it's an opportunity to learn about them, and it's an opportunity to learn about interpersonal dynamics.
Mhm.
So, you know, I guess that's a long-winded way of saying growth is all about interacting with people.
Yeah, yeah. I love that. And I love that you spoke to the foundation of curiosity because, I mean, I think to many different interpersonal dynamics from business leadership to our intimate relationships to parenting. And it's so easy, particularly as a man, and men have, masculine energy is wired to solve. And so often that's not what the feminine wants, right?
They kind of
And
want to just be heard.
exactly, exactly. And it's taken me a long time to understand that, in particular in the interpersonal dynamics. Again, like in leadership, for some reason, it was much more innate. I found that that natural curiosity and desire to really understand just came through. But for whatever reason, it was like a switch would flip in my brain with my intimate relationships with my significant other, and I would go right to wanting to solve problems. And I think I know it was coming from the right place. It was a desire to
Sure.
alleviate pain, but not
Well,
really
I,
understanding
I,
the
I
psyche.
actually think the basis of it is how many men have been socialized to see how they add value.
Mm, mm,
They're
interesting.
coming from a really, really wonderful, noble place.
Mm,
When they're problem solving, they believe
mhm.
that is what they're good at, and that is
Yeah.
how they can most add value to a situation.
Hmm.
And sometimes that's what is needed, and
Yeah.
sometimes that's not what's needed.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. In probably more cases than I would like to admit, it absolutely is.
In fact, I have a great little story to tell you if you want to hear it about
Oh,
that.
please, yeah, too.
Which is way back when I was first starting to teach at Stanford. I came home one day and I explained to my husband this whole phenomenon of how, it's a gross generalization, but there is some gendered ways in which people respond to problems.
Mhm,
And and I said to him, so for instance, when I come home and I tell you that they're all a bunch of jerks, what you tend to do is tell me about all the different things I could do.
mhm,
And I said, so actually, that's not what I need first. What I need
mhm,
first is for you to just listen to me. And
mhm.
and the result of this conversation we had was that he developed a little multiple choice. So when I would come home and I was all worked up, he would say, okay, but this be one of those occasions where you want A, just listen. B, agree with me that they're a bunch of jerks. C, tell me this isn't the first time this has happened. D, suggest something I could do. And then I could just say, oh, today it's just B, just B. And that was a shortcut to what I needed at the moment.
This cracks me up because it's such an example of the masculine. We immediately create a formula to try and decide how to communicate in the moment. It resonates on a really high level. I'm curious, where did this, what called you into this field? I've always found the human mind absolutely captivating.
Yeah,
I come from an initial background in the health and wellness industry, and I quickly identified, I could be the best trainer in the world, but if we don't resolve what's going up on in here,
right.
and we're not able to interrupt the patterns that are driving the behavior that created the problem to begin with, then there's a good chance you're going to fall back into old habits or never actually follow through with completing the journey that you wanted to go on.
Yeah,
And then, that took me in with working side by side with some of my superheroes, Tony Robbins and so on. And he had some really powerful insights. But I'm always curious what drives the individual to end up where they are.
sure.
Like, what was that for you? Was it a life experience? Was it a slow buildup? I mean,
Well,
what?
it's actually both. I used to have a long, convoluted, circuitous origin story.
Mm-hmm.
And then, so I've got a Carole Robin AI, carolrobin.ai. Anytime you want advice on what you should do on an interpersonal issue, go to carolrobin.ai and ask her. You'll get
Oh,
my answer.
amazing.
The only thing it's got is everything I've ever written. So it's not going to get all mixed up with stuff that other people have written.
Hmm.
So, but I asked my Carole Robin AI, so how did Carol get her start? And I love it because it gave me a real cut to the chase version of my origin story.
Yeah.
So, I'm not a career academic, even though I spent 20 years at the Stanford Business School. I've had lots of different careers, but my very first career was in sales and marketing and industrial engineering. And
Ooh.
it was actually industrial automation. And I was a sales engineer, then I became a sales manager. And uh, when I first arrived at this very, very large, everybody would recognize the name company, the first thing I learned was whatever you do in business, there's no place for feelings. So leave them in the parking lot. So I was young, I was new, I was the first woman hired into a non-clerical position. So yeah, I'm old. The dinosaurs were not roaming the earth, but I'm old. And so I got very good at that. Now, fast forward, because I kept getting promoted and eventually I ended up running a big region, $50 million. In those days, it was a lot of money. And
Hmm.
a bunch of guys worked for me. I finally fixed that. But at the moment of this anecdote, I still had 6 guys who worked for me. And we're at an offsite. And I get a little excited about something I think we can do. And I get crickets. And I get a little more excited and I'm getting crickets. And finally, one of my guys leans in and says, wait, Carol, is that like water in the corner of your eye? Oh my God, are you going to cry? And then he said, oh my God, are you like human after all? Are
Interesting.
you human after all? Then I burst out crying. And I said, you
Wow.
don't think I'm effing human? I used the full expletive, but I don't want to offend any of your listeners. I said, I don't think there's anything more important for us to talk about than that. And I
Hmm.
tore up our agenda. We were at a 2-day offsite. It was the very beginning of the offsite. And we spent the next 2 days talking about who we were what we want, what our values were, what we wanted, what we needed from each other. To this day, I believe that was the day I became a leader. To this day, I believe we became an that was the day we became an unstoppable team, which played out over and over again for the rest of the time we worked together as teams. And all because I had this watershed moment where I thought, oh my gosh, I'm not even seen as human.
That, that's a beautiful story, first and foremost. And, what I'm, there's so many things that my brain would like to explore here in the moment. But, one thing I'm curious about is taking yourself back to that moment.
Yeah,
Did that, I firmly believe that, it's the quality of our decisions that create the direction in which we're heading in life. And it's like some small
I
mistakes are not
concur.
going to typically derail, right? But it's the consistency, the patterns of the
Totally.
decisions that are going to drive us one way or another. That decision sounded like a major turning point for you. And especially coming from a male dominant workforce and one in which we were conditioned for a very long time to, omit emotion from the workplace,
Absolutely.
which ironically, and particularly in the masculine, is actually a superpower. I'm a firm believer that, vulnerability is actually a gift
And it comes
that
from
we can't.
strength.
It does. Exactly. Yeah. You have to be significantly stronger to be able to share and showcase your vulnerabilities as opposed to all of your
Exactly.
successes. Everybody can sit on their gold-plated toilet seat on the ivory tower, but it's a whole nother thing to talk about the hard parts of the journey. But for you in that moment, was that uh was it intuition? Was it divine inspiration? Like, because you could have gone a completely different direction. You could have stuck with the agenda, but you didn't. And it became a catalyst for where you are today, is in part what I'm hearing. And it completely I mean, you recreated the organization, the culture, the team with that. So,
Totally.
talk about that decision some more. I would love
And
to
I
hear
mean,
more.
and it changed my life.
Yeah.
It changed the trajectory of my life, to your point.
Yeah.
Uh, you know, my my first thought in the moment was I was so shocked that somebody would not see me as human. My first reaction was just shock, like, what? You know, what what is it about the way I've been showing up that has made you even make that statement? So I think the very first feeling was shock and
Mhm.
dismay. And that was followed quite shortly after by a recognition that whatever I've been doing is may be working at one level, but is probably really not working at a whole other level. And this was the beginning of an insight that didn't really form in the moment, but formed more and more clearly over time, which was I had developed a mental model, a belief, and an assumption that if I demonstrated any feelings, I would not be taken seriously. And I was a small young woman, and I believed that, and I was told quite clearly, no place for feelings in the workplace. And so I had gotten very good at it, and and I'd been rewarded for it. And here's the problem. If I had burst out crying 2 months into the job, I would have probably never gotten to where I got. But I had now overdone it long after it had served me, and it had now started costing me. Because, a cat doesn't sit on a hot stove twice, but it doesn't sit on a cold stove again either. And so that's exactly what had
Yeah.
happened. I had like lost all sight of the fact that maybe initially I needed the credibility that being very logical, rational. I mean, by the way, I think you can be logical, rational, and also emote and have feelings. They're not mutually exclusive, but
Right.
I just had overdone it and I had not realized I was paying a cost. And so what really happened in that moment was, wow, I am paying a cost for the way I'm showing up. And it's a cost that I don't want to pay anymore. I'm done paying that cost. And so it was almost automatic for me to say, okay, time out. This is where we're going,
Hmm. So, I mean, what I hear is there was awareness, there was cost identification,
right?
then you hit threshold, and
Right,
decided enough is enough. This is not going to last. But you said several things throughout this that were incredibly profound, and they resonate with me on a very high level, largely due to my background in behavioral psychology and leadership development and teams.
right.
And and I think a lot of people have not been exposed to a lot of the things that you were intimating and seeding throughout this conversation. And I would love to have you expand upon it for our audience. And
Sure.
what I'm referring to specifically is you were talking about the beliefs that at one stage in your life you were rewarded for that served you. But if we aren't conscious of those beliefs, what was a catalyst in one environment can become a prison in another.
Exactly.
So, what would you say, or maybe where do you start? Is there, when you're, working with a leader or a husband or a wife or a father or, I mean, any leadership role and position, where do you start with that process of identifying these things? Because there was so much wisdom in your ability to isolate how that had served you in one point and was
Right.
also creating a roadblock in another. But most people don't know how to ask the quality of that question, let alone how to dive deep into their psyche and intuition to really figure out that what rules they're living by, what belief systems of value. Talk more a little bit about that. I would love to hear your
It's a
thoughts.
great question, and frankly, it's one of the reasons that I co-founded Leaders in Tech,
Mhm,
and it's one of the great uh, gifts of Touchy Feely, the course at Stanford, which is that it places participants in an environment where they can't help but notice the mental models that they're holding.
mhm,
They're put into an environment where they are they're learning about how to be interpersonally effective by interacting with other people that they don't know and getting feedback on what creates closeness and distance and trust and mistrust by interacting with each other, not by reading about it on a slide, but by
mhm,
actually having engaging with each other and and then being given the opportunity to stop and say, so what beliefs and assumptions drove that behavior? So just giving somebody a chance to notice what you just did, back up from what you just did, and think about what belief drove that choice.
mhm.
And then, one of our core models in Leaders in Tech is the model of an iceberg, which is, the only thing you see in an iceberg is the very top, the little tip, and that's the actual what happened.
Mhm.
And then right at the water level is choices. And right below the water level are thoughts and feelings. And below the thoughts and feelings are mental models, beliefs and assumptions, because they drive your thoughts and feelings, which drive your choices, which drive the behaviors, which create the results.
Mhm.
And way down at the bottom, even below mental models, is a particular kind of mental model called a gremlin. And
Hmm.
a gremlin is that very, you can think of it as an inner critic. I happen to like gremlin because I like the visual.
Yeah.
It's like,
That's great. I've never heard
this
that.
little prancing,
Mhm.
very, annoying little thing that bounces around saying, really, you think that's going to work? What's wrong with you? Uh,
Yeah.
or, just so you know, you're taking a really big risk and it's going to be a disaster. Or you're not fill in the blank enough. You're not smart enough. You're not talented enough. You're not old enough. You're not experienced enough. Just, so one of the great gifts of Leaders in Tech and Touchy Feely is that you have an immersive experience where you are spending a lot of time unpacking for yourself what your mental models are. And now that you become aware of your mental models, you've got a new set of choices. In fact, one way to think about leadership and developing yourself as a leader is think of three concentric circles. Well, not concentric, think of a Venn diagram with three circles that overlap.
Mhm.
Your choices are at the intersection of those three circles. They drive your choices, and that drives your behaviors, that drives your results. And those three circles. The first one is mental models, like I just mentioned. The second one is your skills. And the third one is your style. And what happens is very early in our careers, our mental models get set, our skill set gets set, our style gets set. We have a certain set of choices that drive our choices and our behaviors, that drive our behaviors. But the problem is they get set in a particular context, and the context changes. So now the only way to continue to develop yourself as a leader is to expand the size of your mental model circle, expand the size of your skill circle, expand the size of your style circle, and their intersection, which by definition makes a much larger choice set. And now that can drive your behaviors and your decisions, and you'll get different results. So if you don't like the results you're getting, step
Change it.
yourself back to what is informing the choices you're making.
Hmm. That's incredible. So there's a few things. I'm a firm believer in the power of immersion. Every every single time, I mean, I can literally think back to every event, every time where I had taken a step back out and away from my safety net, the environment that I'm conditioned to, and put myself in some place that was uncomfortable and thankfully was well facilitated and guided. And it was those experiences that have, in each and virtually every case, been the springboard to reaching my next level of self and awareness,
Yeah.
which is constant, never ending. And I wouldn't replace this with anything. So I love that you're doing this in an immersive experience environment. And it also takes me back too, because when I was thinking about, like, when you made this decision, now you were obviously able to see how this affected you and how you were showing up in the workplace and the interpersonal dynamics within the leadership team. But what I'm really curious about is, what did you then start to notice across context? Where else was this showing up in your life, and what happened next for you?
Oh, that's a really great question. I started to wonder how much this belief that I should show up a particular way, meaning uh, non-emotive, was impacting all my relationships. So
Mhm.
once I discovered that's what was happening, I started thinking, how disclosing am I being with my friends and with my by the time this happened, I had gotten divorced, and that helped me think about how much of my divorce happened as a result of the fact that that's how I had been showing up. Uh, and uh, and and it certainly informed how I showed up in my following relationships and how I showed up with my now husband of almost 40 years. So uh, it it definitely had the ripples because it felt like the highest stakes to try to experiment with being more emotive at work. And it had such a positive impact that then I thought, well, my gosh, if it's working so well in this environment where I've been told whatever you do, leave them in the parking lot, I wonder what would happen if I did this with my friends and the guys I'm dating. And I also had an instinct. The word, the phrase TMI hadn't even like come up in those days, but I had an instinct that you don't go from 0 to 100 in 3.2 seconds.
Mhm. Great.
I many years later I learned this particular concept, and it was core to what I taught and continues to be core to what I teach, which is the 15% rule, which is we have our comfort zone where we don't think twice about what we say. That's first circle. Then there's a circle way on the outside, which is your danger zone. In a million years, I would never tell you that. But there's this important circle in the middle, which is your learning zone. Like I got to step outside my comfort zone to learn, but I got to stay inside my danger zone or I freak out and I become deer in headlights and I stop learning too. So then my students used to say, but Carole, the minute I step outside my comfort zone, how do I know I'm not in my danger zone? How do I know I've stayed in my learning zone? So we came up with a 15% rule. Step a little bit outside your comfort zone. A little.
Yeah.
You'll know, you'll feel it in your body. And then an interesting thing will happen. you'll find that that first of all, the world doesn't end. You've only stepped a little bit outside your comfort zone. The other person might reciprocate and step 15% outside their comfort zone. Pretty soon, your comfort zone with that person has become redrawn. It's a little bigger than the one that started out. Then you go 15% from there. And that's how you learn and grow and deepen a relationship. You do it in increments. You don't go all the way to the edge of
Mhm.
learning and teetering on danger in the
Mhm.
first exchange.
It's that's so simple, but so profound. I mean, there's several things that just came to mind. I was literally just reading or listening to this interview with Kevin O'Leary, the guy from the Shark Tank, and he was sharing some data that was that has an interesting parallel to this, where he was talking about the difference between male and female leaders.
Mhm.
And he said, what's fascinating is statistically, numerically, women are more consistent and better leaders, particularly as it pertains to growing an organization. And he thought he's like anecdotally theorized that it's come down to one thing, which was men more often are setting growth goals and projections for somewhere around a 35% range. And they'll hit on average about 60% of that, which is still really good. However, the difference with the female leaders is they're on average setting projections and goals for 15%, but they're hitting those goals 95% of the time.
Mhm.
And
That's
what has happened instead is now the churn within the culture and the team is almost non-existent
right, right.
because we're setting something sustainable, but it's still, to your point, outside the comfort zone where we have to rally the troops and come together to create it.
That's
So
interesting.
I, yeah, it was really, really
And then, of
fascinating.
course,
I thought,
once you've
wow.
been successful 15%, you can go another 15%. Nobody says that that's it.
Yeah, which is phenomenal year after year growth too. I mean, I don't know many people
Yeah.
that would balk at 15% growth. Uh, there's another thing that came to, or a couple of things that came to mind. You know, in essence, what we're talking about, and some of the language, at least that I learned, is false references, or at least maybe it was a relevant reference at that point in time that helped establish that belief, but it can become a false reference. And there's fascinating stories that I've heard to illustrate this, but how often is it that do you run into scenarios where it never actually served them, that it was a belief that stemmed from childhood and was not even something that was consciously adopted as an adult, kind of like your story, as at least as I received it? Or are more of these patterns things that are showing up
That's a,
because of something that served them at one point?
that's an interesting that's an interesting question. My first hunch is that we don't fiercely hang on to beliefs that don't serve us in some way. They kind of fall by the wayside. They don't become, they're not quite as, they lose their charge unless they serve us in some way. They might come from somewhere, but then they don't necessarily take such strong hold if they
Hmm.
don't serve us in some way. I mean, one of my favorite questions for the executives that I've coached for decades, for my students, for my participants, when they're engaging in a particular behavior,
Hmm.
is to ask them, how is that serving you? Or when they're holding on fiercely to a belief, how is that serving you? And a lot of the times that stops them in their tracks and they think, it has served me. I don't know if it's still serving
Hmm.
me. But
That's
I don't know that I think, we naturally evolve, and you're the growth expert, but we tend to outgrow certain beliefs and grow beyond certain limitations and ways of thinking kind of organically and naturally, but we hang on to the stuff that we think is still in some way serving us.
mhm. I wholeheartedly agree. What I'm having a challenge with processing or trying to figure out how to formulate an accurate question around is maybe it's best if I give you an example and I tie it back to kind of the inception point of this conversation. Um, I know for me, for decades, the majority of my adult life, I really I could excel in one area, like in business, but I would attract the same intimate relationships, same types of patterns.
Yeah.
And what it took me a very long time to discover was why I was accepting or even tolerating those relationships in my life when I had a much higher sense of, or at least should have had a higher sense of worth and um, desire. And I think a lot of it came from, childhood traumas, and not in the respect that, I was like, I wasn't beat. My parents were phenomenal people.
Yeah.
It's just, there were certain things about the way that they parented and treated each other that created these unconscious belief systems in the way that I showed up. And the thing that I was able to determine later on was I was carrying these beliefs from my childhood into the way I was
Right.
showing up as an adult in certain areas. So all this to be said, when I think back to what you were talking about, and you had that moment with the 2-day retreat with the team, and you make this conscious decision, and you had mentioned that this is the way that you were up until that point, or at least from the point of entering the business world. Are you familiar with the terms as it pertains to intimate relationships, like the avoidant and the anxious attachment style, like those different attachment styles?
Somewhat, but I'm by no means any kind of an expert.
Well, I think you are more than you realize too. It's probably just the language that you put to it. But like, would you have considered yourself up until that point somebody that was maybe more of the avoidant in your relationships, be it with friendships or intimate relationships or otherwise, where you kept those walls up and
Mhm.
weren't really letting people in with vulnerability, or was it just, compartmentalized to the workplace, or, was it a major holistic transformation, I guess, that you went through?
I I think it was much, much more extreme in business, in the
Mhm.
business world. There might have been some of it in my personal life, um, but I think the majority of my aha was around how I was showing up in business and why I was showing up that way in business and how strongly I believed that was the only way I'd ever succeed as the only
Mhm.
woman over and over and over again as I kept getting promoted, the only woman, the only woman, the only woman. Uh,
Mhm.
and so it kept getting reinforced for me that that's
Mhm.
how I needed to show up
Mhm.
because woman equals emotional equals not promotable equals not successful equals
Mhm.
whatever.
Mhm.
And so I had to break all of those thought patterns. It was
Yeah,
much
yeah.
more oriented towards how I was at business. And there was because I was getting so positively reinforced at
Mhm.
work, it bled into sometimes how I showed up outside of work, thinking, well, if it's serving me so well there, maybe I ought to be a little bit more of a hard ass out here. Um, so,
False references. It's
right.
funny because
It's not as though it didn't impact me.
yeah. It's funny because I frequently use that as an example. It's like what you are. I give the example frequently of like the lawyer. What are they rewarded for all day long? For putting people on the witness stand.
Yeah.
But if they come home and they don't take that hat off and put the husband hat on, the dad
Oh,
hat
yeah.
on, and
Yep.
they attempt to recreate the same things that they're rewarded for throughout the day in their business career at home, they're not likely going to have very successful relationships. And it's a bit of an extreme example, but it it is something that we all do on some level or another frequently if we aren't
Yeah.
consciously aware.
Yeah.
Now, Carol,
The,
go ahead.
what I was going to say is the really cool thing about the work I've ended up doing and which I've dedicated my life to, the book I've written, the stuff that I teach, is its relevance in any relationship, in any context.
Mm-hmm.
And you can work on this stuff in any relationship and in any context. Because once you learn to be more vulnerable
Hmm.
in one context, you will feel a little more empowered to be more vulnerable in another context.
Mhm.
Once you learn how to give feedback in a way that's really effective because you care about the other person and you're invested in your relationship in one context, you are more likely to do it in another context.
Mhm.
So there's, because, we are whole human beings, but we end up being like, well, this is who I am at work and this is who I am at home. And I don't think that serves us particularly well.
No, no, I think there's it can end up feeling like you're, I would imagine, creating like pseudo facades.
Exactly.
You're
Who
feeling
am I really?
incongruent. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, no, that makes complete sense. I it makes me wonder when somebody's embarking on this journey, if somebody's curious about implementing these practices, where do you suggest? What's the best place to start? I mean, is it reading your book? Is it in a 2-day immersion program with you? Like, are there small activities that they can start to start building a little momentum at home and anticipation? What do you recommend?
Well, there are a number of different paths in. So the book is a very easy, very low cost path in. And the book website, www.connectandrelate.com, is an even easier and there's no cost to going to the website, where there's a bunch of articles and a bunch of, if you don't want to read the whole book, and a bunch of
Mhm.
podcasts that you can watch, and just at least get your feet wet a little bit with a couple of the concepts. The
Mhm.
website also has a free downloadable self-assessment where you can actually take a self-assessment on how good are you interpersonally, give this assessment to 2 or 3 people in your life, compare how they see you to how you see you, and then figure out whether or not there's some learning to be done for you. There's
Mm.
a start your own learning group. So, the only investment is each of you gets a book, and then it takes you, it guides you through how to use the book to do kind of a mini version of a course for yourself. At the end of every chapter, there's a deepen your learning section where it's not just you read the concept, you read a story about what happened to a married couple or two buddies that are good friends or two women. All the concepts are taught through relationships that you read about and that unfold throughout the book. But at the end of every chapter, there's a put yourself in Anya's shoes. How would you have reacted? And then there is can you think of a situation where you have faced something like this? And based on what you've just read, what might you do differently next time or do now if you're still in that relationship? So there are, it's the book is like taking the course at Stanford, which is a quarter-long course, one chapter at a time. It's like taking the course. Uh, Now, not everybody's going to go to the Stanford Graduate School of Business. And the reason we ended up writing the book is that an editor came to us and said, so if this is like the most popular course for 4 decades at the Stanford Business School, why is there no book? And, and we said, because you're not going to learn about this by reading about it in a book. And he said, so how are you okay with the only people getting to know this being those that are lucky enough and privileged enough to go to the Stanford Business School?
So you had to challenge a belief there, it sounds like.
We did. At which point David and I looked at each other and said, I guess we're going to have to write a book. So we wrote the book, much to my pleasant surprise. I've had many, many people write to me, tell me how much they learned from just reading the book. But you don't learn about it by reading the book. You learn by reading and then applying what the book has encouraged you to go do. It's only through doing that you learn this stuff.
Yeah.
The Leaders in Tech has both a 4-day immersion, which is like Touchy Feely on steroids.
Hmm.
It's a retreat, 4 days, and we also have a year-long fellows program for CEOs and founders of pre-IPO companies.
Oh,
Uh,
fantastic.
and that's basically the entire Carole Robin curriculum, not
Have you
just
ever have you ever hosted or do you ever host courses like that for, I mean, I know the predominant focus is business, but what about couples, husbands and wives? Have you ever done anything like that to date? I mean, I know the principles work regardless.
right.
So,
No, well, I mean, Leaders in Tech is focused. I mean, our mission and vision uh, is to is to change the culture of tech for good.
mm, mhm,
So, and the reason we're focused on pre-IPO companies is that we would hope that armed with the skills we're giving these CEO founders, the future Facebooks and Googles and Microsofts of the world will have significantly different cultures.
Mm.
Uh, so it's very business focused, very
Mhm.
business oriented. Um, and I think the nature of, and we're a nonprofit, and we have a lot of, the only way we've been able to exist and stay afloat is that we have wonderful donors,
Mhm.
uh, because we can't break even on just what we charge for our programs.
Sure, sure.
So there's a, so it's already kind of taking everything we've got to make that
Mhm.
happen. So now if we start spreading ourselves out to a whole different,
Yeah.
kind of market, that
Mhm.
feels like I'd rather concentrate everything we've got on one market.
Yep. No, that makes complete sense. I mean, it's smart and wise in business, and the reality is, if you take it and apply it effectively in one area, to your point, you're still going to be able to
Right.
leverage
And
the
here's
tools in
the cool
another.
thing. Here's the cool thing. I get as many, if not more, I get tons of emails and letters and visits and calls from past students and past participants who say, I just raised a third round. I owe it all to you. I
Mhm.
just became a CEO from the students. I owe it all to you. Predictable in what
Mhm.
we do. But the ones that are really meaningful to me, Zach, and I get even more of these, are the calls and the visits and the emails that say, I'm pretty sure your course just saved my marriage. And the ones that say, I just reconciled my relationship with my brother, who I hadn't talked to for 2 years. And since the book came out, I get, thank you for finally writing a book, because I was able to go through the book with my fill in the blank personal relationship, and we're in a whole different place.
Mhm.
So there are other ways in which we're reaching the non-business. It's a little bit, it's not a bait and switch, but it's a little bit of an unexpected upside when people go through this and suddenly realize,
Yeah.
oh my God, I
Yeah.
can do this at home. I can do this with my kids. I can do this
Yeah.
with my siblings. I can do this with my parents.
Hmm. No, that's an incredible gift. I want to shift gears in just a moment as we're getting close to wrapping up the episode. But one last question I want to ask before I do
Yeah.
is, I'm curious, as people start to embark on this journey and they start to go through the process, be it whether they're starting with the book or with the 40 immersion, or regardless of their entry point, how often is it? Do you periodically get emails back where people are now realizing, okay, I have a greater level of awareness around myself and the way that I've been showing up, and I now have this desire to create change because I can see how profound of an impact it can have. But now they're maybe realizing, like, wow, the environment that I'm a part of, be it in a personal relationship or the business that we're in and the culture that's been created, is never going to support this growth track for me. And does it end up leading to, I mean, I would presume that that might be I feel like a scary position to be in, but oftentimes would lead to a much more fulfilling outcome. But what are some of your experiences around
Well,
that?
that's one of the reasons we started out Leaders in Tech, with the audience being the CEO founders,
Mhm.
or not, so they create that environment. They're not
Mhm.
embedded in some environment that they don't think they've got a whole lot of control over.
Sure, sure.
So it's much higher likelihood that they get traction than their whole environment follows. And by the way, we have programs for organizations, because they come to us and say, now how do I get the rest of my people on
Yeah.
board?
Yeah.
So
Oh, amazing. Oh, great. Yeah.
we got programs for like whole organizations that we do too.
Mm.
Uh, and uh, so that's one answer. The other is that sometimes people, sometimes you're embedded in an environment that's just not going to support your growth, or in a relationship that's not going to support your growth. A lot of married couples go this way
Mhm.
and this way or this way for
Mhm.
reasons, for good reasons.
Mhm.
Um, but sometimes there's an opportunity to bring the others along with you, to
Mhm.
say, so, you know, in service of our relationship and in service of what we have created together already, I think I'm onto something where we could do something even bigger and better, and some of those leaders have been able to bring their organizations along. Uh,
Mhm.
I had one situation where there was a general manager of a very large conglomerate, and he had multiple presidents. And one of the presidents of one of the business units went through the Touchy Feely for executives, and then brought it into his whole company. And the general manager, CEO, never bought in, never thought this was all BS, and never moved from that. But guess what happened? This particular organization that this president was, oversaw, suddenly they had way less turnover. Suddenly everybody wanted to go work over there. Suddenly other presidents were saying, "What the heck is going on over there? What are they doing? And how do I get me some of that?" So there are a lot of ways to influence systems.
Mhm.
Um, and sometimes you have to get out and go do something else. So I'm not saying that's always the end all be all.
No, I wholeheartedly agree. I mean, I think back to, as I mentioned, different times where I went to a variety of events, and actually, it's not even events necessarily. It could be anything that I'm learning. If I felt like it could have a positive impact on my employees, our team, our culture, an individual, whatever, the first thing I would do is come back and start teaching those principles to the team. Because I'm a
Exactly.
firm believer also too that, one of the best ways to learn is to
It's to
teach.
teach,
You know,
absolutely.
and we've got to get, it's one thing to have the intellectual understanding, but as you go through the process of teaching, you can now start to really embed your learnings into your nervous system. So you're now
Right.
creating an opportunity for it to become more second nature through those practices in action, which I think
Absolutely.
is
Another way I put
amazing.
it sometimes is you start to embody.
Yes.
And
Hmm.
you embody the principles and you live them. Now you're not just talking, you're living them. You become what one of the key questions that we ask all of our participants to sit in is, why should anybody follow you?
Ooh, wow.
And and we spend 4 days helping you answer that question, or we spend a year, or we spend a quarter, or whatever. Why should anybody follow you? And you can learn about leadership by studying other leaders, or you can sit in that question because
Yes,
you're not
exactly.
any of those leaders.
Yeah.
And one of the keys to that answer is that people are more likely to follow you if you are a referent figure, meaning you are a person that other people either admire, respect, see themselves as wanting to be more like. Uh, you're a referent figure. And referent power is a very, very significant source of power for leaders that most leaders don't even understand they have as a potential.
Yeah, I mean, I know I didn't. It took me a long time because I was very much raised in the traditional authoritarian top-down
Exactly.
leadership model.
Exactly.
And early because I took over a company at 19 years old, and I figured out very quickly that that was not going to work, or at least it didn't feel congruent with who I was internally. And
Yeah.
I started making those adaptations. Surprise, surprise, the company grew. Now,
Yes.
Carol, what I would love to shift gears for just a moment
Sure.
and do a little segment that I'd like to call leadership truths. Okay.
Sure.
And what I'd like to do is just throw out a word or a phrase and love your raw take and just a sentence or two.
Okay.
Does that sound good? Ready?
Sure. I'll give it
All
a
right.
shot.
So, first word, feedback.
Breakfast of champions.
I love it. Second, vulnerability in the boardroom.
Um, a demonstration of courage and power.
I love that. The myth of executive presence.
Um, Based on something worth looking at.
Hmm. When a leader feels alone, dot, dot, dot.
Uh, they could use an executive coach.
It's spot on. Total, I wholeheartedly agree with every single one of those answers. And that last one in particular, I think everybody needs a coach, if not multiple, for each of the areas of our lives and specializations. Yeah, there's it's very difficult to see the forest of the trees when you're analyzing your own business life, health,
You also
relationships,
can't extract all the lessons there are to be gained from your experiences unless somebody else
questions.
is causing you to
Mhm.
actually mine for learning, I call it.
Yes. Yeah. Well, I mean, you're spot on. And that's what a really great coach and facilitator does is ask really powerful questions. And when we ask powerful questions, we typically, more often than not, get better answers, which
Exactly.
is an incredible gift. Now, last question to wrap up today, Carole. I would love to know what's one thing that you've learned about yourself from spending a lifetime teaching other people how to connect?
We are all works in progress.
All works in progress, constant and never-ending improvement. And I love that. It's such a simple statement too, but there's a tremendous amount of depth to that as well, Carole, because I mean, you talked about the gremlin earlier. Like we all are our own worst critic.
Yep.
And unfortunately, the conversations that those gremlins are having are more often than not like a broken record on repeat that we're
Hmm.
hearing over and over
Hmm.
and over. So if we can learn to ask better questions and change that inner narrative, it has the potentiality to change our entire life.
And or open ourselves up in a way to other people so that they start asking questions that cause us to ask those questions and start to, shine a light on the gremlin, which makes it much smaller.
Yes, yeah.
There's a lot of
And
its
it
power.
and transcendent impact too. As we grow, people around us, hopefully, will pick up on those same energies.
Yeah.
Well, Carole, this conversation was an absolute gift, so thank you. The
Good.
depth, the clarity, the heart that you brought today is something our listeners won't forget anytime soon. Now, if you're listening and this episode challenged you or made you feel seen, do us a favor, share it with a friend, a colleague, or even your leadership team, because these are the conversations that change how we lead and how we live. Now, Carole, you mentioned a few different resources. You've got carolrobin.ai. You had now I'm gonna have to call upon you again to remind
We
me,
have,
where
we
can
have
our listeners
www.connectandrelate.com. That's the book website. There's the book, Connect, Building Exceptional Relationships, available through all booksellers and Amazon and on Kindle and Voice and whatever. Um, there's also leadersintech.org, which
Mm,
is the organization that provides the 4-day intensives and the full year-long fellows. So
mhm.
yeah, the book website, the Leaders in Tech, and the Carole Robin AI.
Fantastic. So leaders in tech, connectandrelate.com. And we'll make sure we've got all of these links in the show notes so you guys don't have to search for anything. And yeah, make it easy on you. So this is the Perpetual Growth Podcast, and I'm Zach Palmer. A big shout out to Carole Robin for joining us today. It's just been an absolute pleasure. And I'd love to remind the audience, growth doesn't happen by chance. It happens by choice. We'll see you next time.